Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. This is the podcast that delves into the intricate world of global politics of the past and present, while also exploring potential possibilities for what tomorrow could bring. I'm your host, Dylan, and in each episode here of the Geopolitics Explained podcast, we'll break down complex issues into small, understandable chunks through in-depth scenario analysis. So, come and join us as we navigate the ever-changing landscape of international relations, uncovering the stories behind the headlines and predicting trends that could shape the future of our world. This has been recorded on the 4th of July, 2025. Back in December 2024, we saw the South Korean president at the time, President Yoon, declare martial law. In January, the Centre for Geopolitics at Cambridge produced a great episode that covered this topic on their podcast, which is named On Geopolitics, which you can find on podcast platforms of your choice. But since this discussion in January, we've seen many developments since then. So today we're going to dive into the reason why former President Yoon firstly declared martial law that started off this story. We're then going to assess the present day and the changes that we've seen unfold recently in an election to replace Yoon. And then finally, we'll explore potential future trends that could emerge as a result of this political crisis that we've seen in South Korea. Is this just the beginning of the story, or have we reached the end? Let's dive in. So, to flashback to December 2024, President Yoon's popularity within South Korea had been slipping for months, as both him and his wife were mired in a corruption scandal. So when President Yoon declared martial law at the start of December 2024, it was seen as an attempted coup on power. The reason that he gave was that the Democratic Party in South Korea were conducting, quote, anti-state activities and were collaborating with North Korean communists to destroy the country. It's worth noting that when martial law occurs, political activities are prohibited, which includes the National Assembly gathering. Martial law also suspends the free press. As a result of martial law being declared, which would lead to prohibited political activities and the suspension of the press, MPs had to break into the South Korean parliament and had to vote to end martial law. As a result of this entire fiasco, which lasted a singular night, President Yoon was impeached and was subsequently arrested on the 15th of January 2025. He was then indicted on the 26th of January for leading an insurrection. Since then, President Yoon's wider plans have been revealed. There would have been, if Yoon's plan had come to fruition, an arrest of opposition figures and public figures who were against him politically. These political figures included Lee Jae-myung, the leader of the People Power Party, which is the party that President Yoon was a member of, the leader of the Rebuilding Korea Party, a wide collection of journalists, and anybody who would challenge Yoon's rule. When these plans were revealed in the aftermath of Yoon declaring martial law and his subsequent impeachment and arrest, it became clear that this was a grab for power. Yoon's attacks also came heavily against the media, where blackouts were enforced on media buildings, and they were also experiencing cut water supplies. With Yoon impeached after he declared martial law on December the 3rd, somebody had to replace him. This was Han Duck-soo, who was the Prime Minister, and he immediately assumed the role of acting president under Article 65 of the South Korean Constitution. However, later that month, on the 27th of December, Han was impeached himself and suspended after the National Assembly voted 192 out of 192 MPs that were present at the time. They impeached him after accusing him of blocking judicial appointments and enabling Yoon's martial law. As a result of his functions as both acting president and prime minister being suspended, Deputy Prime Minister Choi Sang-mok took over these roles. However, another development occurred in March 2025 when the Constitutional Court ruled 7-1 to dismiss Han's impeachment charge, citing that there was insufficient evidence to prove that he violated the Constitution or laws. As a result, Han was reinstated and resumed leadership for nearly 3 months. The court did unanimously uphold Yoon's impeachment, which officially removed him as president. This led to Han remaining as acting president until elections occurred to select a new president at the start of June. Han announced his resignation as both acting president and prime minister to pursue a presidential bid for the snap election set for the start of June. Choi Sang-mok, who earlier resumed duties as deputy prime minister, then resigned on the same day under the potential threat of impeachment. This led to Lee Joo-ho, who was education minister, becoming acting president from 2nd of May until the election. Han initially entered the presidential race as an independent candidate, but was later accepted as the People Power Party nominee, which is the former party of President Yoon. On the 10th of May, the People Power Party controversially attempted to replace Kim Moon-soo with Han, but Kim was reinstated later that day. Acting President Han eventually ended his campaign a day after the tussle for leadership of the People Power Party, and he pledged to support Kim's candidacy. So if this sequence of events proves anything, it's that before we even explore potential future scenarios, South Korea is very clearly still mired in an ongoing political crisis. All this has led to the present day, where we've just seen a snap presidential election unfold in South Korea. So what occurred during this presidential election? Who is now leading in South Korea? And has there been any further controversy surrounding this snap presidential election? So, moving on to this election now. What were the results? Well, Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party, which is the party that Yoon declared were conducting, quote, anti-state activities when he attempted to declare martial law, were the party that had their candidate win a comfortable victory in the South Korean presidential snap election, when Lee Jae-myung claimed 49.4% of the vote. Kim Moon-soo, who was the candidate for the People Power Party, took 41.1%. The winner, Lee, prior to the election, was cleared of multiple charges. These charges were of election fraud, perjury, soccer sponsorship, remittance to North Korea, and the abuse of credit card privileges. Now, if we look at the winner, Lee Jae-myung, he was a former lawyer and a former mayor of Seongnam, who is credited with saving them from a regional debt crisis. He also served as a provincial governor, and in the last election, he lost to former President Yoon by less than 1%. So, once again, this is more proof that South Korea will likely remain in an elongated political crisis, especially with the winner Lee being mired in multiple potential charges that political opponents will likely attempt to leverage in an effort to get Lee impeached also. Another element of this election to note was the gain of the far-right parties within South Korea, who were especially popular among young men. Lee Jun-seok, a candidate from South Korea's Reform Party, came in third with 8.3%. In exploring the demographics of this election and its results, the eventual winner, Lee, won a majority of the votes when exploring women voters, and he won 48.3% of the vote when exploring male voters. This is more than the 39.4% of Kim of the People Power Party and of Lee Jun-seok of the Reform Party, who won 11.1% of total male votes. Lee also won the most votes between the three when we explore age groups 18 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and 50 to 59. But it was Kim of the People Power Party who won the largest percentage of votes against the other two candidates in age groups 60 to 69 years old and those older than 70. This indicates that older voters likely have a greater support of the People Power Party versus Lee's Democratic Party. The evidence that the far right were gaining among younger voters is explored when we look specifically at the 18 to 29 male demography. Lee Jun-seok of the Reform Party won the largest percentage of votes among the 18 to 29-year-old males with 37.2%. This came versus Kim of the People Power Party, who won 36.9% of this total demographic, and the eventual winner Lee, who won 24% of this total demographic. The rise of the far right is a trend that we are seeing unfold around the world, especially among young men. Young men are clearly being influenced by toxic masculinity and social media. This isn't a world that sounds like it would be particularly appealing to many, but it is a reality that we have to face, that the far right are attempting to influence young male demographics around the world. As we move forward, South Korea still has many issues to contend with. In the aftermath of there being no permanent leader in South Korea during this election campaign, relations with the United States have very clearly declined. Trump hasn't met with them, and when multiple officials have been undertaking Indo-Pacific tours from the United States, they haven't visited South Korea. There is also the effect on tariffs, especially for South Korea and the steel industry. It's clear that there may well be changes in the Korean Peninsula and wider Asia itself. Trump, a few days ago, stated that there would be no trade deal with Japan, and he's been very clear about wanting South Korea to pay more for its defence against the North. We do frequently see US aircraft carriers docked in South Korea, but based on Trump's rhetoric, this defence partnership and relationship could very likely change over the coming months and years. In fact, since Trump re-entered office, we have seen the Chinese, the Japanese, and the South Koreans meet and vow to increase trade. So the rhetoric from the United States seems to be distancing themselves and South Korea, and South Korea is very clearly trying to find other potential answers to the interests that it seeks to protect, especially its defence and trade and its economic issues. It is worth noting that China is South Korea's biggest trading partner, so they do need to maintain a strong relationship therefore. There were also questions internally regarding how newly elected President Lee would address North Korea. It seems since his election at the start of June that Lee has adopted a pragmatic approach. Firstly, on June 11th, his administration stopped loudspeaker broadcasts of anti-North Korea messages that were broadcast along the demarcation zone. This was a move that was intended to lower tensions. In his inauguration address, Lee also affirmed that, quote, peace is always cheaper than war, and he has pledged to reopen communication with North Korea while maintaining a alliance-based deterrent. This once again highlights how important South Korea sees its relationship with the United States and the defence that it provides. Lee seems to favour dialogue paired with offering North Korea rewards if it heads down the road that South Korea wants it to. This would involve North Korea making denuclearization steps, in return for which sanctions could be eased. However, as we've seen, North Korea now seemingly functions despite the global sanctions that are placed on it. The sanctions have been placed upon them for years, and they clearly haven't done much to incentivize North Korea to change. So even if these sanctions were offered to be weakened or reduced, there is no guarantee that North Korea would sign up for such a pursuit. Also, the biggest thing to note here is while Lee has clearly promoted engagement between the North and the South in the Korean Peninsula, Lee stresses that dialogue between the two has to be balanced by a strong US-South Korea partnership, especially in defence. So over the coming weeks and months, we need to keep an eye out on if Trump or any of his high-ranking officials meet with South Korea and the new President Lee and his administration. In the aftermath of this presidential election, we have seen some deem the election as illegitimate. This seemingly confirms that the internal political crisis that South Korea is mired in is going to remain for quite some time. With this internal crisis in South Korea, I question if this will spread into their external relationships, especially with China, who, as I mentioned earlier, are their biggest trading partner, and the United States, which, as Lee has stated since he won the election at the start of June, the defence relationship with the United States is one of the most important deterrents that the South has against North Korean aggression. If Trump weakens this relationship, or if he asks South Korea for more payment for this defence, this could put South Korea in a difficult economic situation, and it could also lead the North to feeling braver to make potential moves against the South. Also, with South Korea mired in this internal political crisis for quite some time now, we haven't seen the South Korea and US relationship maintained because Trump and other figures in the US administration didn't want to meet with a South Korean leader who might not be in power for long. So over the coming weeks and months, this is definitely something to keep an eye on, to see if South Korea can move past this internal political crisis and recognise its need to manage its external relationships, especially with the United States and China. This has been another episode of the Geopolitics Explained podcast. I want to thank you all for listening. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, why not leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice? And if you want more content like this, I write over on Substack. Posts are released on Mondays and Thursdays at Geopolitics Explained. You can find the link for that in the description. I've been Dylan. I'll talk to you next time.